Hey, welcome back, everybody. Thanks so much for being here for Gettysburg 159. We hope right away you'll share this with your friends so as many people can engage in American history as possible. I'm Gary Edelman. We got Chris White behind the camera. We got a special guest on we've never had on one of our lives before. We got Sarah Kay Byerly hanging out behind the camera. You might see her as well. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're at Gettysburg. We're on the Confederate line. Confederate Avenue is right behind the camera, and we're looking across the field of a terrible charge on July 2nd, 1863, and of course the field of Pickett's charge on July 3rd, 1863. But we're going to talk about something you really don't hear as much about, and that is, as you know, we're trying to get down to regiments and soldiers. So we're going to be talking about one of A.P. Hill's soldiers. Now, A.P. Hill is sort of one of the black holes here at Gettysburg. We really don't know what Hill is doing, and we don't know what all of his brigades are doing exactly. The commanders are notoriously light on their reports in a lot of cases, and we're talking about Anderson's division. And about that division, we know all sorts of things. We know exactly what the Alabamians under Wilcox and the Floridians under Perry or Lang here at Gettysburg are doing. We know what Wright's Georgians are doing. We know to an extent what Posey's Mississippians are doing. But what in the world is going on with William Little Billy Mahone's brigade? This is all Virginians here, and really people can't exactly figure out what Mahone is doing, why he's not ordered in. Is he ordered in? Could he have helped? How could he have helped? I'll tell you what, if you've got 37 brigades and you're not using one of your veteran brigades, maybe that's going to cause some trouble here at Gettysburg, and this will cause some infighting within the Confederacy. So we're going to talk about a particular unit. I believe it's the 12th Virginia here in Mahone's brigade. We'll talk a little bit about Gettysburg, but then we're going to zoom forward and you'll see why, because our next guest is Carolyn Janney. She is the John Nau Professor of Civil War History at University of Virginia. She also runs the Civil War Center there. She has a book, award-winning book now called Ends of War. You should definitely check it out, and you'll hear a little tease about that now. With no further ado, Carolyn Janney.
Hi, thank you guys so much for having me, and it's great to be back here at Gettysburg. So I want to talk about one particular soldier in the 12th Virginia, Company F to be exact. His name was James E. Whitehorn, but they called him Eddie. He was 23 years old here at the Battle of Gettysburg, and he had enlisted in June of 1861. He's from Greenville County, Virginia, which is down on the Virginia-North Carolina border. He enlisted in Norfolk, like I said, in the summer of 61. But he didn't see much action that first year, almost 2 years of war. He suffered with rheumatism, spent a lot of time in the hospitals. But he is back in the ranks by the spring of 1863. He sees action at Chancellorsville, and then he's here at Gettysburg. On the second day, even though, as Gary just told us, Mahone's brigade doesn't see much action, Eddie manages to receive a horrific wound. He is hit by a shell fragment that causes severe injury to both of his legs, so much so that he is out of the ranks until June of 1864. He will make it back into the 12th Virginia just in time for the Battle of the Crater, where yet again he is struck in the leg and receives another severe wound. He is again out of commission until the fall of 1864. So even though he's been in the ranks all along, he has seen very little action because of his illness, because of these wounds, but he will make it back in late March of 1865. And from that point on, we have a fantastic diary that he kept that goes from March 25th until April 22nd. And it tells us all about his experience there, those last few days in the trenches around Petersburg. He's talking about how there's still hope for the Army, even though they are so hungry. And then his account of Lee's trek westward as he's trying to meet up with Joe Johnston and head south to continue the fight is absolutely riveting. I think one of the most powerful points that he makes is on the morning of April 9th. He talks about how Mahone's division at this point has been sent out and they are preparing to fight. They think they're getting ready to go in, and all of a sudden they're called back and they decide that they're going to start throwing up breastworks. They think that the Union Army is behind them, and then they get word from Mahone himself to stop, that it's all pointless, that in fact the Army has been surrendered. And his diary entries at this point are absolutely excruciating. On one hand, he talks about how it seems worthless, that what about all of these men who have died, that everything that they've done has been in vain. And he says that he hopes that he will be killed. He wants to fight. He keeps saying, why don't they send in Mahone's division? Why did they only send in the others? Because if we had fought, maybe we could have won, but more importantly, he says maybe he would have died and would have avoided the humiliation of having to go back home and explain to his family what it was all for. But he also tells us that he doesn't know what he's going to do. He says, for 4 years, all I've thought about is drilling and fighting and surviving, and now I don't know what to do. He said, I don't know how I can go back and farm the fields or work in a store. I'm a soldier now. And so we have these riveting accounts of him taking us through the surrender parade on April 12th, talking about how he's looking around at the Union soldiers in the 5th Corps and thinking, they're afraid of us. They don't want to meet us off the field of battle. And he goes back to his tent and he awaits that slip of paper. He's going to help fill out, he's a sergeant by this point, he's going to help fill out the parole passes that will allow the men to go home. And he writes in his diary that night, this is the night of April 12th, he said, 2 signatures on a piece of paper. One that enrolled me in the Army and made me a soldier, and the other that makes me, and he just leaves dashes. He didn't know how to finish that sentence. He didn't know what he would be after he made his way home. The diary, though, unlike so many others, continues, and he follows his trek home to Greenville County, through Charlotte County. He manages, along with another comrade, to find a rundown mule that they ride for a period of time. They are welcomed into the homes of some locals who feed them bread. There's one young lady that is particularly nice to them and bakes some bread out of some cornmeal that they've been able to find, and they decide to name the mule after her. I'm not sure whether that's a compliment or not. But they make their way home within a week. And the last entry in his diary, April 22nd, 1865, he's gotten word from town from one of his comrades that the church service is going to start again, that the chaplains have made it back from the Army, and he's gotten word that there will be a Confederate Veterans Organization. This is April 1865, and there's a Confederate Veterans Organization that's going to form. And in the very last line of his diary, he says, I was a soldier, but guess I'm a veteran now. He still isn't quite sure what this post-Appomattox, post-war world is going to look like for him. So that's one of the stories that I tell in Inns of War.
That's just great stuff, you know, Carrie. I have a question or two for you, but real quick, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're on the Gettysburg battlefield for Gettysburg 159. Let's take a few steps forward as well, so we can see a little bit more of the battlefield, and we'll suffer through the heat for a little bit longer. There is a nice breeze here, so don't worry about us. It's so good to see people north, south, east, and west, and I think I saw someone from the UK as well watching us. So it's just great. We're glad that you're engaging. We're glad you're enjoying the soldier stories, and that was excellent. A lot of people are enjoying this particular story, Carrie. So your book sort of does something nobody had done before, and that is to really look at this Army afterward. Is there an overarching message that you sort of learned while you were writing this book, or something that was surprising to you that you really didn't expect to find?
I think there's 2 takeaways. I think one of the most important things is thinking that Appomattox wraps everything up very neatly for us. And we see, if we slow down the pace, if we look at what's happening, you know, hour by hour, day by day, even week by week, we'll see much of the confusion. We'll see the good intentions of Lee and the magnanimous terms that he's offered at the behest of Lincoln. But we'll also see all of the unanticipated consequences and problems of disbanding an army during a civil war. Would men be allowed to return home? Did the parole passes actually protect them from prosecution for treason? This is a question that erupts even as Eddie Whitehorn is sitting in his tent waiting for that parole pass. People in Washington are starting to discuss whether or not the parole passes, whether the paroles themselves have been much too generous. So I think, to answer your question, Gary, it's the uncertainty that we see. Instead of assuming that we know how the story's going to end, we can see that there were so many other possibilities. And we can also see, and I didn't set out to write this story, but my first 2 books have been about Civil War memory and looked a great deal at the lost cause. And I, again, didn't set out to write another memory book. But as I looked at the things that these men are saying and what they're experiencing, I find that the lost cause is very much taking root immediately. That we see in comments like Whitehorn's about looking at the members of the 5th Corps as they're getting ready to surrender their flags and guns and saying, you know, they should be afraid of us. We shouldn't be afraid of them. And this absolute devotion to the Confederacy that only seems to swell in the aftermath of Appomattox. I think we can trace those roots back to April of 1865 as well.
Good, good. Thanks. I just love this part of it. I never thought about the idea. I've always loved this idea that, you know, Appomattox is an effective end, but just one end, right?
Right.
And then you have sort of people from Appomattox showing up in Raleigh, you know, among Confederate soldiers who haven't yet surrendered. And
Right.
in this case, they're already talking about a veterans organization. That just blows
Isn't
me away.
that amazing?
It really is.
Absolutely.
Now, somebody was asking, do you know what happened to Eddie Whitehorn later? I know you said the diary ended, but...
Right, so he stays in the Petersburg area, or I should say he moves back to Petersburg. He's not all that far, but I find it fascinating that he, you know, spent so many months in the trenches around Petersburg and comes back and runs a small business there.
Oh, very cool. Now, let me just say that if you want to learn more about this, you've got two options. If you're in town, go to the Gettysburg Foundation, the Museum and Visitor Center tonight at 7.
7 o'clock.
And I think you need a ticket, but it's a pretty big room. So I hope they're all sold out, but maybe they're not. And if not, go check out numerous other options. You can just Google Carrie, and I think you'll end up seeing some videos about the ends of war. But go to the Addressing Gettysburg podcast, where Matt and Eric had a great time talking about this. As much as you can talk and have fun talking about war, we do this all the time. It was a blast. So I think you can learn a lot about the book and hear a lot more of these stories as well.
Thank you.
Good. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to rattle on for a little bit, but we're so happy to have you here. And
Thank
you
you,
teachers,
Gary.
look for Carrie at our Virtual Teacher Institute coming up. Now, here we are along the Confederate line here, and I think it's really interesting that they're forming Confederate organizations right away, but here we are, and we're standing next to a Tennessee monument that wasn't even put up until 1982. This was the first Tennessee memorial on this particular battlefield. And even beyond, if we look toward North Carolina, that's 1920s. The Virginia Memorial is 1917. The Confederates were not anxious to use precious resources that they had to monument a battlefield where they didn't win in the North. So that all figures into it as well. And also this whole thing that as Virginians and North Carolinians are fighting and arguing about who got farther, who did what, who was taken care of and who was coddled, Mahone's brigade sort of fits into all that. We'd love to hear what you think. If you're a real nerd and you get down to brigade level, how could have Mahone been employed? What if Wright's brigade, which charged across this field, all the way across, passed by the clump of trees, just like Pickett's charge was aiming to, what if he'd have had another brigade on his left? What if that would have meant Posey would have had the support for his Mississippians to go all the way across? Could that have mattered? Did you still need the next division over under Pender to move forward? We'd love to hear what you think about this. Let me ask my colleagues here, Chris, Sarah, anything else to add here? All right, well, here we are on the Confederate line. We've already been live. We hope you've watched our Liberty Rifles march around. We're going to be following them around as they recreate the charge of the 1st Minnesota a little bit later today, maybe 5, maybe 6 o'clock. We don't want to say exactly when because we don't know exactly when, but look for us between the lines at some point today. Look for a Devil's Den video that we pre-shot coming up around lunchtime, and make sure you share this with your friends. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks to Carrie, thanks to Sarah, thanks to Chris, and to all y'all for supporting battlefield preservation and education.